We're going to dive in with this first story because it was quite a shock yesterday receiving news that our Governor General is resigning amidst controversy. Julie Payette quit after an independent investigation found Rideau Hall to be a toxic workplace, where staff say they were publicly humiliated and suffered verbal abuse. So, what's your reaction to this story?
I got to jump in right away and just say that I adored and idolized Julie Payette. I've always had this fantasy of going into space and being an astronaut. And when you see one and you know that you've got this Canadian astronaut, you kind of put them on a pedestal. You think that they're Canadian hero. And she's accomplished so much. But it sounds like, according to this third-party independent, review of the workplace at the Governor General's office, that it was really toxic, and the people who work there were not treated right. And that's, in my book, there's just no excuse for that. And she even writes in her resignation letter, she goes, "We should always strive to do better and be attentive to one another's perceptions." And so that's part of that resignation letter. And it's so important to generate a healthy workspace. It doesn't mean that everybody has to get along and there's no stress. It just means that people have the right, employees have the right to go to the office and not be harassed, not be harangued, and not have to run out of the place crying. So I think that she did the right thing in stepping down, but it lends itself to make you wonder, as an astronaut, she probably had to go through so much to become an astronaut and work with so many different people, but she's probably got that striving for just to be number one, and it may have made it difficult for her to relate to people. This is what I'm speculating, but no doubt about it, you can't have that kind of toxic environment. That's just not acceptable.
You know what, Rosie, though, even though she has stepped down, I don't think the story is over because there are many questions about how, she was elevated to that position in the first place. And that's why the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is being brought into this conversation. It's emerged that even though we haven't seen the details of the report yet, it has emerged that there was no vetting panel put into place before Julie Payette was appointed, which his predecessor, Stephen Harper, did when he was appointing GGs. And the Prime Minister has been criticized. And I do think that some of the criticism is warranted. You talked about workplace culture. Before you even establish a culture, you establish a hiring practice and how you bring candidates in. And vetting is one of those things. Why didn't the Prime Minister properly vet this person? Because there were reports of previous incidents of this kind of behavior at Julie Payette's previous workplaces.
Angie, you're an American. Obviously, this is not part of your necessarily immediate landscape, but everyone has experience with toxic workplaces. So, what's your take on this?
Well, first off, as an American, I cannot judge your government in any kind of way. We just got adults back in charge. So, yeah, I can't make any judgments. But I definitely dealt with a toxic work environment. Before I became an author, I worked at a church, and it was the most toxic work environment that I've ever experienced in my life.
At a
I had to
church.
get in, yeah, I had to get in therapy after I left that job
Whoa.
because
Wow.
it was so affecting my self-esteem.
At a church.
I had a supervisor who, anytime I came in wearing anything, she judged what I was wearing. She
Oh.
judged my hair. She judged how I
Mm,
signed my name
mm.
on papers. And
Mm.
now she wants to act like she's my best friend now that I'm Angie Thomas, the author. But I experienced a lot at that workplace. And it goes to show that people will abuse their power and their position no matter where they're working, even at a church. And again, like you were saying, like
Angie,
y'all
can
were
I ask you a
saying.
quick question?
Mhm.
No, finish your thought. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, like, does this strike you? So in this case, no one gave any formal complaints. So I'm curious, in your situation that you're just describing, like, did you give formal complaints, or were you afraid to?
I did. I actually went to the senior pastor of the church and gave complaints and found out that I was not the first employee to complain about this
Mm.
supervisor. And basically I was told, just be patient and pray for her.
Oh my gosh.
I
I
want
mean,
to
this is
unpack
ridiculous.
that.
To me, that's a systemic problem,
No.
right? Like, go ahead, Rosie. Like, I just think there's a systemic
Yeah,
problem
I
here. I'll
do.
just say that.
I hear you. And, Cynthia, I want to unpack the word toxic, right? Because some folks might be wondering, well, what does that mean? And to me, a toxic work environment means you can't even walk in without feeling utter dread. And it's when you are at a workplace where you feel absolutely alone and unsupported and under attack. I think that would constitute a toxic work environment. And in this case, again, we didn't see the report. We don't have the report in our hand. But it sounds like that's what the Gigi's office was generating, this toxicity where a lot of people felt very unsupported and even threatened. And that's where
doesn't that come from
it
the top down?
happen.
You know what I mean? Doesn't that come
Yeah.
from the top down? Like, I think a lot of times that pressure that someone at the very tippy top is putting, and I don't know in this situation, but in general, everyone can relate to a toxic work environment, is that at the person at the top is putting that pressure, and then it filters down from there. I mean, having said that, though, some people are just not warm and fuzzy by nature. Some people are a little bit brusque and crispy. And so I'm interested in these kinds of, like, how do we determine whether or not somebody is actually, utilizing their power in ways that are just awful, and versus somebody who is just kind of a little bit, kind of like their personality is a little bit crispy. And I don't know. The only thing I'll just suggest is that I find that women are called out for this behavior more often than men, and men still hold the bulk of power. So that is something that, again, we're not going to be able to unpack all of this today, but it just leaves me thinking a lot of other thoughts.
You're right, Cynthia. You're right. I mean, just look at Steve Jobs, legendarily toxic boss, story after story of how he treated people, and held up as, a hero all the time. So I think it's a really interesting point that you raised, Cynthia. But in terms of leadership, President now Biden, lots of people were talking about it on his first day when he was like initiating new staff members. He made it very clear, my White House will not be toxic. If I hear that you are mistreating people in this White House, you're going to be fired on the spot. So I wonder whether or not his White House is going to be a little more grown up, to your point, Angie, and a little less toxic than the last one.